Hello everyone, this is Suzanne at the Gospel Truth, formerly known as God Crochet and Chatter. Of course, I come on and talk about God. We do our Bible studies, and we recently just started doing a book reading. Maybe we'll call it the book club. And I read a book and we discuss it, and so far you are seeming to like that. I am enjoying it. So I think we're probably going to continue doing that with various books. If you have a book that you would like to be read, please let me know, and we can put that on the list. All right, I decided that we need to have a giveaway. Yes. Now, this giveaway is specifically geared toward the people that are following along with the reading of The Hiding Place. And I think that's only fair because you will understand more, and I think it will have more meaning for you, the book that I'm giving away. Now, we are currently reading The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. They hid Jews in a secret room in their house that was specifically built to keep them from being carted off to the concentration camps or to be killed. And they were very brave in doing so. Well, that's called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. Now, there is after we get done with this one, we're going to do this, God is my hiding place. Now, in this book, she's going to go on to tell us about how God was her hiding place. And I think that's an appropriate name for it. God is my hiding place. And then she wrote several books. Then this one here. After we get done with The Hiding Place, God is my hiding place. And this here, Each New Day. It's 365 reflections to strengthen your faith. This is a lovely, lovely book. It says, Corrie ten Boom was a remarkable woman of great faith. Against all odds, she was able to trust and serve God even in a Nazi concentration camp and throughout the days and years that followed. But faith like that just doesn't happen. It's grown day by day through regular meditation on God's Word. And then it goes on to a little bit more. So this is going to be for our giveaway. And a name will be drawn on December 17th. That's a Sunday. And then I will pop that right in the mail when I receive whoever's going to win this lovely, lovely book. I am very drawn to Corrie, more so than ever. I've heard of her throughout the years and thought, but when you really start reading her story and that of her family, it takes on a whole new meaning. Light shines forth in the darkness, and how her and her family contended with that darkness. All right, so December 17th will be the drawing. And as soon as I hear from you, I will get that out in the mail, whoever the fortunate winner is. All right, let's get right into our book. Later today, I will be doing our study in the Paul and the prison epistles. We are still in the book of Ephesians on that. Lots to do, right? All right, let's get started. The last we left off, do you remember that Corrie had realized the vision? She had seen it all. William, Nolly, Pickwick, Peter, all of us here, drawn against our wills across this square. It had been in the dream. All of us leaving Harlem, unable to turn back. Going where? Wow. That's a scary place to be. You're out of your home, the things that you've known and loved for years and years, your daily routine, and they were living in constant fear of being discovered. And remember that the prison guards had beat up Corey and her sister in Pickwick trying to get information. They knew that they were hiding the Jews, but they just did not know where. And they were so frustrated with them, so absolutely frustrating. All right, chapter 10. Shivagensen. That's the name. A 2-hour drive brought us into the streets of The Hague. The bus stopped in front of a new building, and word was whispered back that this was Gestapo headquarters for all of Holland. Imagine your country being invaded, and now Gestapo headquarters for all of Holland. The Germans had invaded. We were marched into a large room where the endless process of taking down names, addresses, and occupations began all over again. Have you ever gone to the doctor's office or to the hospital? More so the hospital. They ask you the same questions like 5-6 times. That can be quite frustrating. The chief interrogator's eyes fell on Father. "That old man," he cried. "Did he have to be arrested?" William led Father up to the desk. The Gestapo chief leaned forward. "I'd like to send you home, old fellow," he said. "I'll take your word that you won't cause any more trouble." I could not see Father's face, but I heard his answer. "If I go home today," he said evenly and clearly, "tomorrow I will open my door again to anyone in need." Being honest, isn't he? The face drained from the other man's face. "Get back in line," he shouted. So his politeness drained from his face, and now he's angry again with him. As we inched along the counter, there were endless repetitions of questions, endless consulting of papers, endless coming and going of officials. It was night when we were marched at long last out of the building. We made out the bulk of a large canvased roof army truck. 2 soldiers had to lift Father over the tailgate. There was no sign of Pickwick. Father, Betsy, and I found places to sit on a narrow bench that ran along the sides. The truck had no springs and bounced roughly over the bomb-pitted streets of The Hague. I slipped my arm behind Father's back to keep him from striking the edge. William, standing near the back, whispered out what he could see of the blacked-out city. We left the downtown section and seemed to be headed toward the suburb of Scheveningen. It appeared now that our destination was the federal penitentiary. The truck jerked to a halt, and behind us massive gates clanged shut. We entered an enormous courtyard surrounded by a high brick wall. The truck backed up into a long, low building. Soldiers prodded us inside. I blinked in the white glare of the bright ceiling lights. I felt a shove from behind and found myself staring at cracked plaster. I turned my eyes as far as I could, first to the left and then to the right. There was William. 2 places away from him, Betsy. Next to me on the other side was Tooze. All like me, standing with their faces to the wall. Where was Father? Then somewhere to the right, a door opened. "Women prisoners, follow me." As I stepped away from the wall, I glanced swiftly around the room for Father. There he was, a few feet from the wall, seated in a straight-backed chair one of the guards had brought him. Well, they're showing a little bit of kindness. We started down the long corridor that I could see through the door, but I hung back, gazing desperately at Father, William, Peter, and all our brave underground workers. "Father," I cried, "God be with you." His head turned toward me. The overhead light flashed from his glasses. "And with you, my daughters," he said. I turned and followed the others. Behind me, the door slammed closed. "Oh, Father, when will I see you next?" Betsy's hand slipped around mine. Ahead of us in the corridor was a desk. Behind it, a woman in uniform. As each prisoner reached this point, she gave her name for the 1000th time that day and placed it on the desk, whatever she was wearing of value. Nally, Betsy, and I understrapped our beautiful wristwatches. The officer pointed to the simple gold ring that had belonged to Mama. I wiggled it away from my finger and laid it on the desk. They're being stripped of everything. Beautiful ring that was her mom's. Their beautiful watches on their wrist. I'm not quite sure what I'd be thinking. Would I be numb to the experience? Would I trust in my God and know that He is out in front of me, fighting for me? The procession down the corridor continued. The walls on both sides of us were lined with narrow metal doors. Now the column of women halted. The matron was fitting a key into one of the doors. The door banged shut. The column moved on. Another door unlocked. Another human being close behind it. No two from Harlem in the same cell. Betsy stepped through a door first. Before she could turn or say goodbye, it had closed. 2 cells farther on, Nally left me. Now the corridor branched and we turned left. Then right, then left again, an endless world of steel and concrete. 10, boom, Cornelia. Another door rasped open. The cell was deep and narrow, scarcely wider than the door. A woman lay on the single cot, 3 others on straw ticks on the floor. "Give this one the cot," the matron said. "She's sick." A spasm of coughing seized my chest and throat. "We don't want a sick woman in here," someone shouted. They were stumbling to their feet, backing away from me. "I'm so sorry," I began, but another voice interrupted me. "It isn't your fault. Come on, Franz Mike, give her the cot." The young woman turned to me. "Let me hang up your hat and coat." Now here she is, very sick. She's going through this while she's coughing, rasping. She was drug out of her bed. She was beaten up. They were thrown in a cart and now separated from her whole family and in this cell that's as wide as a door and then it's long. And she's not alone. There's other people sharing this, so it had to be very tight quarters. Gratefully, I handed her my hat, which she added to a row of clothes hanging from hooks along one wall. I kept my coat wrapped tight around me. The cot had been vacated, and I moved shakily toward it, trying not to sneeze or breathe. I sank down on the narrow bed and went into fresh coughing as a cloud of dust rose from the filthy straw mattress. At last the attack passed and I lay down. The sour straw smell filled my nostrils. I will never be able to sleep on such a bed, I thought, and the next thing I knew it was morning and there was a clattering at the door. "Food call," my cellmates told me. I struggled to my feet. A square of metal had dropped open in the door, forming a small shelf. Onto this, someone in the hall was placing tin plates filled with steaming gruel. I don't imagine it was very tasty. "There's a new one here," Franz Mike called out. "We get 5 portions. Another tin plate was slammed onto the shelf. I picked up my plate, stared at the watery gray porridge, and handed it silently to Franz Mike to eat. In a little while, the plates were collected, and the pass-through in the door slammed shut. Later in the morning, a key grated in the lock. The bolt banged, and the door opened long enough for the sanitary bucket to be passed out. Can you imagine? What a nasty way to live, to be treated. You're pulled away from everything you knew. You had food every day, shelter, warmth. And now, this grueling stuff they call food. The wash basin was also emptied and returned with clean water. The woman picked up their straw pallets from the floor and piled them in a corner, raising a fresh storm of dust that started me coughing again. Then a prison boredom, which I soon learned to fear above all else, settled over the cell. At first I attempted to relive it by talking with the others, but though they were as courteous as people can be who are living literally on top of one another, they turned aside my questions. I eventually realized that prisoners instinctively shed away from questions about their larger lives. For the first days of imprisonment, I stayed in a frenzy of anxiety about Father, Betsy, William, and Pickwick. But these thoughts led to such despair that I learned not to grieve into them. Yeah, if you let yourself go down that road of grieving, you can fall into a deep pit of despair and hopelessness. I was finding it hard to sit up. Increasingly, I was spending the days as I did the nights, tossing on the thin straw pallet, trying in vain to find a position in which my aches were eased. My head throbbed continually. Pain shot up and down my arms. My cough brought up blood. Wow. How horrible for her to have to feel this way, on top of everything else that she's experiencing. Being sick, just that alone will color everything. I was thrashing feverishly on the cot one morning when the door sail opened and there stood a steel-voiced matron. "Ten boom, Cornelia." I struggled to my feet. "Come with me." My coat I was wearing already, but I took my hat from its hook and stepped into the corridor. The matron relocked the door, then set off so rapidly that my heart hammered as I trotted after her. At last we stepped out into the broad, high-walled courtyard. For the first time in 2 weeks, blue sky. How high the clouds were, how white and clean. "Quick!" snapped the matron. I hurried to a shiny black automobile. She opened the rear door and I got in. 2 others were already in the back seat. A soldier and a woman with a gray face. Next to the driver slumped a desperately ill-looking man. As the car started up, the woman beside me lifted a blood-stained towel to her mouth and coughed into it. I understood. The 3 of us were very ill. The massive prison gate opened, and we were in the outside world, spinning along broad city streets. I stared in wonderment through the window. People walking, looking in store windows, talking with friends. Had I been as free as that only 2 weeks ago? Probably seemed like months ago. The car parked before an office building. We entered a waiting room jammed with people and sat down under the watchful eyes of the soldier. When nearly an hour had passed, I asked permission to use the lavatory. The soldier spoke to the trim white uniformed nurse behind the reception desk. "This way," she said crisply. She took me down a short hall, stepped into the bathroom with me, and shut the door. "Quick! Is there any way I can help?" I blinked at her. "Oh, yes. Could you get me a Bible and a needle and thread, a toothbrush and soap?" She bit her lip doubtfully. "I'll do what I can," and she was gone. But her kindness shone in the little room as brightly as the gleaming white tiles and shiny faucets. My heart soared as I scrubbed the grime off my neck and face. A man's voice at the door. "Come on, you've been in there long enough." I rinsed off the soap and followed the soldier back to the waiting room. The nurse did not look up. Another long wait, and my name was finally called. The doctor asked me to cough. took my temperature and blood pressure, applied a stethoscope, and announced that I had pleurisy. Ooh, that can be extremely painful. She wrote something on a sheet of paper. Then he laid a hand for an instant on my shoulder. I hope, he said in a low voice, that I'm doing you a favor with this diagnosis. In the waiting room, the soldier was on his feet, ready for me. As I crossed the room, the nurse rose briskly from her desk and swished past me. In my hand, I felt a small something wrapped in paper. I slid it into my coat pocket as I followed the soldier down the stairs. The other woman was already back in the car. The sick man did not reappear. All during the return ride, my hand strayed to the object in my pocket. The high walls loomed ahead, and then the gate rang shut behind us. At last, at the end of the long, echoing corridors, I reached my cell. My cellmates crowded around me as I unwrapped the package from my pocket. 2 bars of pre-war soap appeared. No toothbrush or needle, but a whole packet of safety pins. Most wonderful of all, in 4 small booklets, the 4 Gospels. I shared the soap and the pins among the 5 of us, but though I offered to divide the books as well, they refused. I stretched my aching body on the foul straw and clutched the precious books between my hands. 2 evenings later, the cell door banged open and a guard strode in. "Ten Boom, Cornelia," she snapped, "get your things." I said farewell to the others with my eyes and followed the woman into the hall. She paused to unlock the door, then marched off down the corridor, heading deeper into the maze of prison passageways. She halted in front of a door and opened it with a key. I stepped inside. The door clanged behind me. The bolt slammed shut. The cell was identical to the one I had left, 6 steps long, 2 wide, a single coat at the back. But this one was empty. As the guard's footsteps died away from the corridor, I leaned against the cold middle of the door, alone. I must not let my thoughts run wildly. Sit down on the cot. This one reeked even worse than the other. I reached for the blanket. Someone had been sick on it. I thrust it away, but it was too late. I dashed for the bucket near the door and leaned weakly over it. At that moment, the light bulb in the ceiling went out. I groped back to the cot and huddled there in the dark, setting my teeth against the stink of bedding, wrapping my coat tighter around me. The cell was bitter cold. What had I done to be separated from people this way? In the morning, my fever was worse. I could not even stand long enough to get my food from the shelf in the door, and after an hour or so, the plate was taken away untouched. So here she is, cold, sick, the smell of sickness all around her, to the point that it made her even sicker, and now she was so weak she couldn't even get to her food plate. Toward evening, the pass-through dropped open again, and the hunk of a coarse prison bread appeared. By now, I was desperate for food, but less able to walk than ever. Whoever was in the hall must have seen the problem. A hand picked up the bread and hurled it toward me. It landed on the floor beside the cot. I clawed for it and gnawed it greedily. For several days, while the fever raged, my supper was delivered in this manner. Mornings, the door squealed open, and a woman carried the plate of hot gruel to the cot. I was starved for the sight of a human face, as for the food, and tried in a hoarse croak to start a conversation. But the woman, obviously a fellow prisoner, would only shake her head with a fearful glance toward the hall. The door was open once a day to let in the trustee from the medical, supplied with a dose of some yellow liquid from a very dirty bottle. Wow, don't these people know about germs? You don't put a sick person in a room that's reeking with germs and who knows what other sicknesses that other prisoners had. I guess they didn't care. It sounds like they're being treated like animals, doesn't it? This same trustee was also charged with recording my temperature each day. By the end of the week, an irritable voice called through the food slot. "Get up and get the food yourself. Your fever's gone. You won't be waited on again." I sure felt that the fever had not gone, but I could creep, trembling, to the door for my plate. When I had replaced it, I could lie down on the smelly straw. Thoughts, now that I was alone, were a bigger problem than ever. I could not pray for family and friends by name, so great was the fear and the longing wrapped around each one. Those I love, O Lord, I would say. You know them. You see them. Oh, bless them all. Thoughts were enemies. That prison bag, how many times I opened it in my mind and pawed through all the things I had left behind. A blouse, aspirin, a whole bottle of them, toothpaste with the peppermint taste, and then I would catch myself. If I had to do it again, would I put those little personal comforts ahead of human lives? Of course not. But in the cold nights, as the fever pulsed, I could draw that bag out of some dark corner in my mind and root through it once again. A towel to lay on the scratchy straw, an aspirin. We have a little bit more in this chapter. This cell had a window, 7 iron bars ran across it, 4 bars up and down. It was much too high to look out of, but I could see the sky. You know, Corey isn't allowing her mind to go to a place that's going to cause her to even go into a deeper depression, a place of not trusting in God. Sometimes in life, don't we do that? We dwell on the negative so much. We are worried about people and maybe in our families and stuff. And if we constantly dwell on that stuff, it will bring us down. And we have to find ways to get our mind off of things through reading a book, knitting, crochet, whatever craft you do, whatever you find to do to draw you out of that pit. All day I kept my eye fixed on that bit of heaven. Sometimes clouds moved across the squares, white or pink or edged with gold. And when the wind was from the west, I could hear the sea. Best of all, for nearly an hour each day, gradually lengthening as the spring sun rose higher, a shaft of checkered light streamed into the dark little room. As the weather turned warm and I grew stronger, I could stand up to catch the sunshine on my face and chest, moving along the wall with the moving light, climbing at last onto the cot to stand on tiptoe in the final rays. As my health returned, I read the Gospels, seeing whole the magnificent drama of salvation. As I did, an incredible thought prickled in the back of my neck. Was it possible that this war, Shevingen prison, this very cell, none of it was unforeseen or accidental? Could it be a part of the pattern first revealed in the Gospels? Had not Jesus, and here my reading became intent indeed, been defeated as utterly as our little group and our small plans had been? But if the Gospels were truly the pattern of God's activity, then defeat was only the beginning. I could look around at the bare cell and wonder what conceivable victory could come from a place like this. A woman in the first cell had taught me to make a kind of knife by rubbing a corset stay against the rough cement floor. It seemed to me important not to lose track of time. So with a sharp honed stay, I scratched a calendar on the wall behind the cot. As each long day crawled to a close, I checked off another square. I also started a record of special dates beneath the calendar. February 28, 1944, arrest. February 29th, transport to Shingen. March 16th, beginning of solitary. And a new date, April 15th, 1944, my birthday in prison. 2 days after my birthday, I was taken for the first time to the shower room. A grim-faced guard marched beside me, but nothing could dim the wonder of stepping into that wide corridor after so many weeks of close confinement. At the door to the shower room, several women were waiting. Even in the strict silence, this human closeness was joy and strength. I scanned the faces of those coming out, but neither Betsy nor Nolly was there, or anyone else from Harlem. The shower was glorious, warm, clean water over my festering skin, streams of water through my matted hair. I went back to my cell with a new resolve. The next time I was permitted a shower, I would take with me 3 of my Gospels. Solidarity was teaching me that this was not possible to be rich alone. I was not alone much longer. Into my solitary cell came a small, busy black ant. I had almost put my foot where he was on one morning when I realized the honor being done to me. I crouched down and admired the marvelous design of the legs and body. I promised I would not so thoughtlessly stride about again. Okay, I'm going to continue reading. I know this chapter is a little bit longer than usual, but I really think we need to finish the chapter. We've only got a couple more pages, so let's continue on. After a while, he disappeared through a crack in the floor. But when my evening piece of bread appeared on the door shelf, I scattered some crumbs, and to my joy, he popped out almost at once. He picked up a piece, struggled down the hole with it, and came back for more. It was the beginning of a relationship. Isn't that something, how God provided this little ant for entertainment for Corey? Something she could love and feed, companionship. Despise not the small things, right? Now, in addition to the daily visit of the sun, I had the company of this brave and handsome guest, soon of a whole small committee. If I was washing out clothes in the basin or sharpening the point on my homemade knife when the ants appeared, I stepped at once, giving them my full attention. It would have been unthinkable to squander 2 activities on the same bit of time. One evening I heard shouts far down the corridor. They were answered closer by. Now noisy voices came from every direction. How unusual for the prisoners to be making a racket. Where were the guards? The shelf in my door had not been closed since the bread came 2 hours ago. I pressed my ear to it and listened, but it was hard to make sense of the turmoil outside. The guards must all be away. Please, a voice pleaded. Let's use this time before they get back. What's happening? I cried through the open slot. Where are the guards? At the party, the same voice answered me. It's Hitler's birthday. People shouted their names down the corridor. This was our chance to tell where we were to get information. I'm Corey Ten Boom, I called through the food shelf. My whole family is somewhere here. Has anyone seen Casper Ten Boom, Betsy Ten Boom, Nolly Van Woerden, William Ten Boom? I shouted the names until I was hoarse and heard them repeated from my mouth to mouth down the long corridor. I passed names too to the right and left as we worked out a kind of system. After a while, answers began to filter back. Along with personal messages were rumors about the outside world. At last, some of the names I shouted out began to return. Betsy Ten Boom is in room 312. She says to tell you that God is good. Oh, that was very inch Betsy. Then, Nolly Van Woerden was released more than a month ago. Released? Oh, thank God. Two, released. News from the men's session was longer returning, but as it did, my heart leaped higher and higher. Peter Van Woerden, released. Human slurring, released. William Ten Boom, released. As far as I could discover, every single one taken in the raid on the BG, with the exception of Betsy and me, had been freed. Only about Father could I discover no news at all. Although I called his name over and over in the murmuring hall, no one seemed to have seen him. No one seemed to know. It was perhaps a week later that my cell door opened and a prison trustee tossed a package wrapped in brown paper onto the floor. I picked it up, hefted it, turned it over and over. The wrapping paper had been torn open and carelessly retied. But even through the disarray, I could spot Nolly's loving touch. I sat on the cot and opened it. There, familiar and welcoming as a visit from home, was her light blue sweater. As I put it on, I seemed to feel Nolly's arms circling my shoulders. Along inside the package were cookies and vitamins, needle and thread, and a bright red towel. How Nolly understood the gray-colored hunger of that prison. She had even wrapped the cookies in red cellophane. My eyes fell on the postage stamp. Hadn't a message once come to the BG under a stamp, penciled in the tiny square beneath? I moistened the paper in the basin water and worked the stamp gently free. There definitely was writing there, but so tiny I had to climb again onto the cot and hold the paper close to the bulb. All the watches in your closet are safe. Safe? Then they had gotten out of the secret room. They had escaped. They were free. How had they managed it? How had they got past the soldiers? Never mind, dear Lord, you were there, and that's all that matters. Sometimes we don't need to know all the details. We just need to be thankful that the Lord was there, and that's really all that matters. The cell door opened to let in a German officer, followed by the head matron herself. My eyes ran hungrily over the well-dressed, well-pressed uniform with its rows of brilliant colored battle ribbons. Miss Ten Boom, the officer began in excellent Dutch, I have a few questions I believe you can help me with. The matron was carrying a small stool that she set down for the officer. The officer sat down, motioning me to take the cot. He took out a small notebook and began to read names from it. To my relief, honestly, I did not know any of the names he read, but now I understood the wisdom of the name Mr. Smith. Oh, Mr. Smith. Excuse me. You have to excuse, I have a little bit of glaucoma, and sometimes it's hard for me to see the words clearly. It's not bad, but it's annoying. The officer stood up. Would you be feeling well enough to come to your hearing soon? Yes, I hope so. The officer stepped out into the hall, the matron scurrying after him with the stool. On the 3rd of May, I was sitting on my cot sewing. Since Nowdy's package had arrived, I had a wonderful new occupation. One by one, I was pulling the threads from the red towel, and with them embroidering bright figures on the pajamas that I had only recently stopped wearing beneath my clothes. Suddenly, the food shelf and the door banged open and shut with a single motion. There on the floor lay a letter from home, the very first one. I unfolded the paper. Corey, can you be very brave? I forced my eyes to read on. I have news that is very hard to write you. Father survived his arrest by only 10 days. He is now with the Lord. I stood with the paper between my hands so long that the daily shaft of sunlight entered the cell and fell upon it. Father. The letter glittered in the light as I read the rest. Nolly had no details, not how or where he had died, not even where he was buried. Dear Jesus, I finally whispered, to think that Father sees you now face to face, to think that he and Mama are together again. I pulled the cot from the wall, and below the calendar scratched another date, March 9th, 1944, Father released. Okay, so they're not quite at the concentration camp yet, but they are in this horrible prison. She just received news that her father died, and she's thanking the Lord that him and Mama are now together. And everything she's going through, being so sick, and then receiving news of her family, and Nolly, wonderful sister, or Betsy. No, was it Nolly or Betsy? I think it was Nolly that sent her the package with all these wonderful things. She must have felt like she was rich beyond measure. All right, the next time we meet, we will be in chapter 11. And let's see. Okay, it's not too big of a chapter. I know this went over a little bit today, but I'd like to finish the whole chapter for us to get a really good, complete picture of what's going on. Wow. Each time I read a chapter, I don't know about you, I'm just in awe of her trust in the Lord, of her. It's very inspirational to see how she's handling her situation each step of the way. Wow. That's a blessing for us indeed. All right, everyone, this is Suzanne at The Gospel Truth. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow with the next chapter called The Lieutenant. All right, take care for now. And thank you for spending a portion of your time listening to this wonderful story of Corrie ten Boom and her family.